Hello and welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Varelli, founder and CEO of Project Purple and the host of the Project Purple podcast. And we have another interview for you coming up with a very special guest after a few quick updates. It's fascinating as I read this because doing this so many times and this year is just like going so fast. We are on pace for another record year, which is just, it's crazy. It's amazing. It's a blessing all in one. I just want to thank everyone who has supported, donated, or participated in a Project Purple event to make this year as special as it has been already. Speaking of next year, though, because most of our teams are either ran a race in terms of our marathon teams, or they are full. But we have launched 2024. We've launched our 2024 London Marathon team, as well as our Colfax Marathon half and relay teams, which is in Colorado. And big news, we are back in the Boston Marathon as an official charity partner for 2024, which is huge. This now makes us an official charity partner of the 5 largest world marathons, and many of our other 2024 races will be launching very soon. To learn more about all these great events, visit our website at projectpurple.org and make sure to follow us on social media to stay up to date on all things Project Purple. Without further ado, let's meet our special guest today. First time going all the way to Switzerland. We've never had a guest from Switzerland on the podcast. Pancreatic cancer survivor, Martin Inderbitizin. Martin, welcome to the Project Purple podcast.
Thank you, Dino. It's a big pleasure to be here today with you guys.
Well, the pleasure's all ours. And as we were kind of playing Connect the Dots before, I believe someone on our team saw your story. I know you've been, I'm excited. So I know we talked a little bit, like we had a slew of interns this summer to help us on all things marketing. And one of the priorities was the podcast. So they really did a great job of lining up so many amazing guests that our audience has heard over the last couple months. And I don't do a lot of research on the guests. That's just me. Usually it's either the day before or the morning of, or, a little bit before. And the reason being is it's not disrespect for anything. I just love hearing the people's story for the first time on the podcast when we hit record, right? And so when I was doing some research yesterday for your podcast, I was like just blown away by all the work you've done. So just really excited to have you on here and your story. So with that, I'm going to hand the microphone, as I say, over to the guests to kind of share their backstory and share their background and what brings them to the podcast today. So with that, the microphone's yours, Martin.
Thank you. Yeah, with pleasure, I can share a bit of my turbulent story and maybe share some experiences and learnings I get away from it. So as you mentioned, from Switzerland. I grew up here in Zurich, beautiful town, and enjoying my life until around 10 years ago, where I dramatically had a shift by getting hit by pancreatic cancer diagnosis. And I know everybody listening, you have your own stories or somebody. So I don't have to dive into how this feels or how overwhelming it is. We all know and it is. So for me back then, what was interesting is you mentioned a lot of marathon races in the intro. So for me, my natural shift was to turn to triathlons. I never did any kind of these sports before. It was, in my opinion, when I look at it in the back mirror of my life, it was my way of coping with my fear, because the survival rate was very slim, was back then around 5%. I was 32 years old. And so just finished my Ph.D. in Neuroscience, like ready to start my career. Ironically, I did my PhD on topics of stress and emotions. So now I'm always joking, like I learned first all the theory and then I got the practicum, like how it feels. And I can tell you it's not the same. So yeah, my natural response back then was to sign up for a triathlon, which was kind of crazy. I never did something like this. I hated running. I had not even a bike. I knew how to swim. I was once in a swim club when I was a teenager, so that was good. But yeah, it was just, I had to pick something crazy to say, okay, if I get here alive, I'm going to do this. And that's what I did. And I'm not sharing it here that I think everybody has to run a triathlon or a marathon. Sometimes that puts the bar very high for others. Maybe you listen to this while you're on the sofa recovering from something and you like think, what the F, like, Martin, I can never do this. So I think it's not about the triathlon. I think what really helped me is to have something that was like a light in the dark, like something to look forward to, something. And that can be anything, it doesn't have to be this kind of masculine Hollywood storyline of, yeah, I'm strong, I'm a marathoner. I don't think that's for everybody the right approach. But what helped me was definitely to have something to hold on, and something that helped me to cope with my fear, because every time I go running, and until now when I go running, I feel safe because like my body works. And so I'm safe. At least that's what I tell myself. The last 10 years, as you said, I did a lot of projects. I started a non-profit organization called My Survival Story, where we share, similar to your podcast, like we share stories from other survivors, spreading stories, authentic stories, stories of hope, where you can like see, okay, how do other people cope with it? And I did that all while going through multiple cancer treatments. So my story unfolded in a way which is kind of uncommon for pancreatic cancer. It became kind of chronic, but until now, and I touch wood because it looks like I'm just entering another very interesting phase of treatment. Until now, it was never getting like out of control. So I had like, I think 5 big surgeries. I had a lot of chemos. I had a lot of microablations, small surgeries. And I kind of up and down. I kind of like trying to keep it at bay and do whatever you can while fighting for your life. And I share this also because I think it's important when you get bad news. Of course, you never know what's going to happen. I got my last bad news a week ago. So I will have to start treatment again in the coming weeks. And so you never know what's going to happen. And it's always scary. And it's always like, maybe this is the last round. But then I'm here since 10 years doing this. So if you have now bad news at home, you never know, maybe the moment it feels really bad, but maybe it's not as bad. So that's what I learned from all these years going through this illness so far. Yeah.
So I want to back up to so you were 32 when you were diagnosed. That's really young.
Yeah.
So what was, and I know you said, I know from reading, and you just said that, you had just gotten your Ph.D. in neuroscience, which was probably stressful, which I know you mentioned that you specialized in stress and emotions, which we're going to talk about that. But so what were your signs and symptoms, and like how did we get there? Like at that diagnosis at such a young age, it's just so crazy.
I always say now Swiss cheese saved my life because we were like in the mountains in Switzerland for a retreat, and we ate a lot of fondue. I don't know if you know, like when you melt the cheese, and we ate a lot of that, and we had some white wine and probably some liquors, and the next day I had really hard pain, like stomach pain. And so what happened is probably a combination from the tumor and from this evening that I got an inflammation of the pancreas. And so the first sign I had was a pancreatitis, like pancreas inflammation. And from then on, we actually could find the tumor at an early stage, which was probably very, very helpful, very lucky. But since then, I never felt my illness. I had like multiple relapses in the liver. Mm-hmm. Now I have something in the liver and something in the lung, and I don't feel anything since 10 years, which is kind of very surreal. Like doctors telling me, look, it looks like this or that. And I only feel the treatment, but not the illness. Yeah.
That's so wild. So yeah, so that pancreatitis, that inflamed pancreas, like if you didn't have that, and I know, I mean, we've talked to people that have dealt with, pancreatitis for a long, long time and nothing happens, right? In terms of them developing cancer. And then you hear stories like yourself where people have like these short bouts of pancreatitis put on onset by who knows. I don't think there's any hard data that says, hey, if you drink X or you eat X, that you're I mean, we do know like prolonged, alcohol, and certain foods, if you're doing this nonstop, you're going to have issues. But just to do it at a one time and eat something, or, even if it's on an occasion, doesn't normally cause pancreatitis, right? So if you didn't have this episode, and you find it early enough,
we will not have to talk today, probably.
Yeah. Well, and that's another key piece, right? In early detection, because we don't have early detection. There's no early detection of this disease globally, right? Nowhere in the world do we have. I know we're here in the States, we are, and it's actually happening all around the world, where we do know from a genetics piece that there is something underlying, that, anywhere close to about 10% of the cases here in the United States do come from some sort of genetic mutation. So given that this was 10 years ago, and now fast forward to where genetics is a big piece of this disease today, have you had genetic testing over the last 10 years? Has anyone kind of taken a look at the genes?
Yeah. I did multiple genetic test panels, small, big ones, and unfortunately, we don't found any targets that we could use for treatment.
Wow.
Yeah. But something I would recommend everybody to do, and normally doctors point it out now more and more, but also if the chances are slim, I would recommend doing it, because, you never know, maybe you'll find something.
Yeah, I know here in the States, it is required now when you do get diagnosed and you go into any center in the United States. I know that's a little bit of a struggle around the world. I know for our friends in the UK, that's been a big push over the last couple years, and even today, that they do genetic testing, because we've had some guests that are very young, similar age, where they had to really, really, really advocate for genetic testing, which is just, to us, I guess to me, it's pretty foreign, because now that there is such a emphasis here in the United States for genetic testing, but other countries move a little bit, their mechanics are a little bit different than how we are here in the States in terms of how the medical system is. So it does take some time, I guess, in some other countries to get that pushed through. The thing you said about the triathlon. Okay. So I mentioned we do a lot of running. I started running a lot. That's how we got into running when my dad was diagnosed. That's how I dealt with his diagnosis. And it's so fascinating because you mentioned triathlon. Triathlon scares the crap out of me. And the biggest piece of that is the swimming. I hate swimming, like that, just being in that. So to do a triathlon, I think anyone who does it, it's just so amazing. It's on that, you toe that line of being a little bit nutty, because you got to do the run, you got to do the bike, you got to do this. Well, it's really swim, bike, run in that order, right? To me, that's just like insane. Like it's an awesome insane. Like I think it's just like when we think of endurance athletes, and I know we've had this argument internally and externally, because we used to do some stuff with CrossFit, which, CrossFitters say they're the most fittest athletes in the world. I tend to think sometimes it's the triathletes, because, to really do all those three disciplines and do them really, really well, it's a lot. So, and I also know I've never done one, but from having people, work with us and do triathlons, there's really a science to it. And I think for our audience listening, I just want to, the point I'm making here is you get diagnosed. So you're dealing with all of the cancer stuff, which is a lot. And then the triathlon, you just don't, someone just doesn't go, hey, there's a triathlon this weekend, I'm going to go do that, without any like serious training. And I know that one of the biggest keys in that triathlon piece is the training, but also the nutrition, because depending on the distance, you could be out there for 11, 12 hours and you've got to eat, you've got to manage all this, you've got to figure all this out. We always say you never do anything for the first time on race day, right? Like whether it's nutrition, your shoes, your kit, your outfit, right? Like your bike, like you've got to like put a lot of work into that. So how was that during that experience? Because that had to be kind of like, I just love to kind of talk about that a little bit. Maybe that was a great distraction for whatever, because there's so much going on.
Yeah, I think you get a point with the distraction, because the moment, and I literally, I signed up for the triathlon while I was getting chemo in the hospital. Like I literally was connected to the chemo, and I got like my phone out, and with one hand, I could only type with one hand. I got my start number, which was totally nuts, because I mean, back then I could walk for 10 minutes and then I was exhausted. And for me, it was really distraction away from being ill to forward, like how to become fit again. And of course, in the beginning, my first training was in the hospital. I mean, I call it training, but it was like a 5-minute spin on the home trainer, you know, like the bike, the stationary bike.
Yeah.
It was like, and I walked down with my chemo, with my like the little trolley with the chemo down to the ground floor where this gym was in the hospital. And I sat for 5 minutes on the home trainer. And I mean, the guy taking care there of the whole gym, he was like looking at me like, kind of, what do you want here? And it's like, yeah, I want to train. And so this was 5 minutes training. And of course, this has nothing to do with the triathlon training. And yes, it was and still is one of my most important training I ever did, because it was this kind of first little step. And then I of course, at one point I downloaded a training plan and I realized it's too much. I cannot do that. And I just adapted. I just said, okay, today I go walking. Okay, today I called it in the beginning in the swimming pool, I called it floating. I like the old ladies were actually faster than me, you know, like, and I realized, okay, maybe I still need to improve a bit my game. So I really just tried to feel also my body and feel like, what do I need? And realizing my body is still full of toxic chemicals and not pushing it over the top, you know, but it shifted my focus from being ill to, okay, I just want to build up slowly my body. And of course, I have to add, I was not signing up for an Ironman out of the hospital. It was like a short distance, like Olympic distance triathlon, which I think is more like a good start when you never did a triathlon, because as you said, like as long as the big ones, yeah, you need much more of preparation and nutrition and all these kind of things. Like, yeah.
The Olympic, whether you do a sprint or Olympic one, that's still a lot of work. No one, I mean, again, for the audience listening and watching, I mean, you're going through treatment, which, like you said, is ravaging your body. And then now you've got to train for this. Like, to me, that's like the good insane, right? That I said, like, it's just really, really, and I am always so fascinated, Martin. And one of the things that I think is just awesome when we bring survivors on the podcast and they talk about these things that they do. And this is probably going to shift here. The conversation is just the ability to take your body to that point where you don't think you could go. And I am just super fascinated by that. But I think when it comes to cancer, and when you think about, okay, you have these survivors, you know, going through this cancer journey, going through treatments, and then still being able to run races, you know, hike mountains, do all these things. And I know to your point, I know you said this, like, it doesn't have to be these extreme things, but still to even do these other things that they're doing in their lives by pushing themselves is just really, really wild, where we don't know we can take our bodies to that point, right? To that And I don't know if it's a tipping point or to the edge to be able to do these amazing things is just really, really fascinating to me. So my question, and I know you've got, your PhD here in neuroscience, is, how much of this is, for what you went through, mental versus physical?
It's a good question. I would answer it the following: like, if you sign up for something like this out of chemo, maybe just in parentheses, I don't believe that you have to do that to survive. Like, I think it's always important to, like, if somebody listens and says, oh, I just cannot find the energy or the mindset to do it. And then you get scared, like, oh, Martin did that and Martin survived 10 years. And if I don't run a half marathon, I will die. And I don't believe that. So that's just very important to put out there. But what I believe is that physical activity in any kind of form, that can be walking or swimming or biking, or it doesn't have to be extreme sports, is supporting you and your body and your immune system. And by that, like, supporting you in the treatment. Also, while you're on chemo, there is a lot of study and science on it that it's actually good to move your body while on chemo. So back to your question, if it's physical or mental, I think it has a lot to do with mindset. It has a lot to do with, because look, when I started, I could not run because I was lying for 3 or 6 months on the sofa. Like, my ankles and my knees were hurting. So I first had to walk and important there is like, do you have the ego mindset? The mindset is like, oh, okay, I'm strong, I'm going to show everybody how good I am. Or do you have like a self-loving, constructing mindset that also realizes, hey, wait, today it's okay if I just walk for 15 minutes. I think mindset that's also mindset. Can you slow down and see, like, okay, the old ladies in the swimming pool are much faster than me, but can you still keep training while you realize, okay, I'm really, really low, but that's where I am. Okay, tomorrow I will be better. Like, that you don't give up hope. And I think that's the key to any kind of success that you want to do, no matter if it's a triathlon or anything else, to get this kind of playfulness of like self-loving curiosity. Like, okay, what do I need now to make the next step?
I love that you just said mindset, because for those watching, you've got the picture behind you that goes all the way down, and then the last one is mindset. So I want to
the story about this picture. Like,
no.
Listening, I explain, like, it's like 11 times written the word mindset, and the first line is correct, and then everything is like turned upside down. That's from an experiment I did 2 years ago, where I was wearing a goggle that turns up the vision upside down, and I was wearing the goggles for 10 days without taking it off. Like, together with the museum, it was like a self-experiment. And so what you see here is how the mind adapts slowly. You learn how to write again. So it's, for me, it's like a metaphor of a crisis of, like, also cancer. First, everything is upside down. You don't know where it's, like, what to do. But after a while, your brain adapts. Your brain is very adaptive, and it's much more adaptive than you think. You are the one who, like, oh, no, I cannot do it, or I'm scared. Your brain doesn't care. Your brain is a little child, just wants to find out what to do now. So it was very interesting to like relearn how to write. And then on the last day, I took off the goggles and I could, like, write the word again normal. So yeah, that's a funny story about this picture.
I love it. And what you just said is so powerful, because I can think about my own examples, and we're going to spend some time here, because you just said something about mindset that I want to go to, but go back to what I just said. Like, oftentimes there's this analogy, like my mom always says, you can lead a camel to water, you can't make them drink, right? Mm-hmm. So oftentimes I feel a lot of people, and I know some people use it like the grieving stages, right? Like, it's angry and then there's acceptance, right? And I think with mindset also, like, I've seen people where there's that diagnosis, and then, there's all these questions, and they're frazzled, and then they get this acceptance, and then they thrive. and they live and they do these amazing things. And I'm not trying to point out anyone or shame anyone. I think everyone's journey into that realm or those realms is their own, right? But you can't force people into that, I feel. So, but you said something here though, which is really fascinating, because as you were talking, and I'm making notes here, and I've talked about like your subconscious and our subconscious. I've did some training years ago, and it was always like your subconscious drives like 99% of your conscious decisions, right? And if you really want to create change and become a better person, you really got to like change that subconscious. And that's really hard to do sometimes, right? Because there's all these things that have allowed our subconscious to think certain ways or to do certain ways. Corniest analogy is like, which you probably, people don't realize this, they put their right shoe on before their left shoe every day, right? And there was some subconscious decision at some point that forced you to do that, right? I always use, the other one's like your pant leg, like putting on pants, like you put in your right before your left. Like, why do you do that? Like subconsciously, that's ingrained in us. So, but you talk about this mindset of self-loving and ego. So I want to spend some time on that, because I think that's really important here when we talk about like, that shift and that mindset a bit. So given your experience and what you've done professionally and personally, and maybe we can't like, again, you can't force people to do this, but what are some steps maybe that people can do that? Because I do believe what you said, like having that self-loving, like you said that, I was like, man, that's so true. And like, even for me, like I go to run, like I just love to run because it's my thing. I don't care about the time. Like, hey, I knew, I think the first 4 or 5 marathons, I'm never going to be a 3:30 marathoner. And I accept that, but I just love the journey of being out there and just the process of being there. But so what are some of the things that maybe we could share with the audience about those two things that could be a big deal here when we think about mindset?
So you mentioned different things, like one is the episode of how a crisis unfolds and the acceptance process. And the other thing you mentioned is like, how can we train a mindset that a constructive mindset? I prefer the word constructive mindset versus positive mindset, because I mean, I know in the US it's a lot about think positive and so, but I think constructive is like a helpful mindset, and sometimes it's more helpful to sit down and cry and give space to your emotion. It's actually healthier than just trying to stay positive. So I believe mindset is really a skill, and it's something you can learn, and it's not like something you're born with, and it's something you can train and you can become aware of, and you can always ask yourself, okay, is my mindset helpful or not? What always helped me is, in every crisis are 2 very powerful questions. One is like, what do I need now? Like honestly asking myself, what do I need? What is now something, a resource or something that can help me? And the second question is, what do I don't need? And that's a question which, when you have cancer, you can answer much easier and with more confidence, and say no to stuff and people. And that's very deliberating. And because you realize time is limited, and okay, I don't need that. And you can set borders. And so it's both questions are addressing what I call the self-loving mindset, like being able to take care of yourself. And the counter effect is, that you are driven by ego and just proving. And, I heard a very cool word saying today from Gary Vaynerchuk. He was saying, ego is just slang for insecurity. I love it. It's true. Like ego is like, okay, you're insecure. You have to prove something. You have to show off, or you're driven by, I don't know, power, or because you're insecure. And that's the same. And that brings me back to the first part of your question with the acceptance. Like, Like in the beginning, when you're in a crisis, we don't want to accept. Of course, it sucks. It's like, I don't want this. I'm angry and I'm sad. And I think that's good. I think that's normal. That's like, give space to these emotions. Like emotions are not good or bad. Emotions are comfortable or uncomfortable. And I will not call it bad, because every emotion has a function. It's here for something, you know? And so take your time, cry it out, or destroy something in your house. I don't know, like whatever is needed. But then is a point where you have to ask yourself, okay, and now what? And nobody can take it away from you. Like some people get there in a week, some needs a half a year. I don't know. But then comes the point where you said, okay, when people accept, it's when they start to create their life. It's the acceptance it's accepting doesn't mean giving up. It's the contrary. And a lot of people get that wrong. They think like, yeah, but when I accept and then I give up. No, it's the contrary. It's like once you accept, you actually can start moving on.
I love that. That you hit the nail right on the head. You know, and that is so freaking powerful.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard, you know, like when your dad was diagnosed, it's hard, you know, yourself. It's hard to accept that somebody has that, and maybe we are not God and we cannot save everybody. It's really, really hard. But you probably know from yourself, once you did that, you can like find a new way of relationship or a new way of grief or whatever, a new way of what you want to do. I mean, now you do Project Purple, you know, like it's all part of that process.
Yeah. But though there are some days too, for me, that, I think I had acceptance early on of my dad's reality. But then there's days still where sometimes I think it's normal to mourn, right? Like in you know, in passing. And I remember reading something in a book, about like, you know, if we didn't mourn as hard as we did, then that means that those people didn't leave that powerful of an impact on our lives. Right. Question for you here. And we might go down a rabbit hole here. Mm-hmm. This segment about mindset has been so fascinating, so powerful to me, because I think it's an important narrative that we share, given your experience and what you've done. Do you think there's some system challenges in place that don't allow people to have that acceptance? And I know you and I were talking beforehand, we hit record, and something that I've been really, really kind of the last 3 years during the pandemic, really adamant about that, you know, this term of, as I put my air quotes up here, survivorship, right? And cancer is a $1 trillion business around the world, right? And there's a lot of offshoots within that business. And, you know, we just went through this thing, the pandemic. I'm not shaming anyone, but you know, the data now is coming out in terms of, you know, who was really sick. The sickest of the sickest were these people that had lots of comorbidities, right? But here we are in the US where, you know, fitness and a lot of things to help people get healthy aren't really in the forefront. So going back to this, do you think there's some systemic issues here, not done purposely, but just maybe how the systems are built that don't allow patients the resources to do what we just talked about, having that acceptance, giving them skills and the training to build those mindsets when they get diagnosis of pancreatic cancer or other cancers?
I'm not sure in which direction you point with the question when you ask, are there systemic like issues? Because the first thing that comes in mind for me is not like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know the American healthcare system in detail. I know here in Europe or in Switzerland, how it's organized, but it's not a systemic issue why people cannot accept that. The first thing that comes in mind is like something, how we are built, like what I would call the monkey mind. So the reason why it's so hard to accept and get the right mindset and like naturally just know what resources you have to choose to get better, is because we have such an outdated software up there in our hardware. Like this thing was built like 200,000-300,000 years ago, and we have like old mechanism, fear circuits that just go off very automatic, very quickly. Everybody knows that, like if you get an angry email or whatever, somebody calls you something, you get emotional. And I think the reason is more up in our head and in our biology, how we are built, that the natural response is denial. The natural response is very emotional. It's very quick. It's very like impulsive. And it needs a certain kind of awareness and a certain kind of self-reflection, and maybe also training or like trying stuff out to become aware of this kind of mechanisms and responses. And so it's very natural and very human that you become angry and sad and denial, and you don't want to have what you're in. But as I said before, you don't have to stay there. Like you can ask yourself what you need, what can help you, can train. And then, I mean, I don't know how it's in the US, but I think we live in an amazing time. I mean, you have access to so many resources and so many content pieces, and you can find the information you need. Like, and I'm not just talking about the random Google searches. Like there are good websites and resources out there where you can find help and where you can find stuff that can like support you in your healing journey. I don't know if this answers your question or in which direction you wanted to ask.
Yeah, no, it does. But I also feel, I guess the question then, like, I know here in the States, like doctors, the way the system, and I'm not trying to blame doctors, but like they go to medical school and they get particular training. I don't think many doctors have like this type of training, right? Like where they're going to tell you, well, here are the two key questions. Like, what do you need and what don't you need? It's just like, I think a lot of the mental stuff is like, hey, here's a book, or, oh, there's our psychologist. Like if you're feeling depressed, you can talk to psychology, the person to come in, or, now here in the States, it's like, well, now they've got this thing, THC, like take a brownie, you feel a little bit better, suppress, it helps you with your appetite, and it gives you like this high.
I agree.
So it's like just they're forcing. So, and again, I'm not trying to point blame to anyone. And I think there's a lot of things in this, like that the system is so big, it's so slow to move, like genetic testing before, right? Like I know, like, the UK has centralized medicine, but like, they could, with a flip of a switch, check the box, they could do genetic testing across the board at all their public healthcare systems, where here in the States, every system is different. So it has to come from the government. So I don't know. And again, I'm not trying to point blame to anyone, but from having this conversation, adding a couple pieces into that process, I would think would benefit people versus them having to search it on their own, right? I guess is my point.
I totally agree. And I can just confirm, like also on our side of the pond, that the system is very mechanistic. It's very body focused, cell focused, medicine focused. There is not a lot of time or resources or education for the healthcare professional to actually support the emotional or mental struggle that come along with the cancer diagnosis. And what happens then, as you mentioned before, say, okay, go to the shrimp. And then, of course, 90% of the men, they just say, no, I don't need that. The women are probably a bit more open, more brave, and say, yeah, maybe I should try it. And like there is a lot of stigma around it. And that's also a part of my work, or why I come to podcasts like yours to talk about this and say, hey, look, it's an extreme situation. And so you don't have to be ashamed if you say, I'm looking for a coach. That now helps me to go through this. It's like, it's also on the patient side, or people affected by cancer, that we are like, it's not only the system is not offering it, but also we are feeling a bit like, oh, what is this? Like, do I need that? No, I'm strong. Like, I don't need that. And I think that's BS, because when you break your leg, you're also not going to have a coffee with your best friend and say, hey, can you fix it? And if you struggle emotionally with cancer, that, okay, let's have a beer with my buddy. And no, maybe there is, like, as you said before, subconsciously deeper stuff. And you want to have a professional go with you digging there, and I do that a lot. I take psychological help since 8 years and I love it. It's not always easy, but it's really, really good. Like, I would not be sitting here in the same mindset and same attitude without that help. And I think that we have just to point out. Yeah.
It's fascinating that we bring that up. And so I am a firm believer in mental health. But if you think about it, it's so wild what you just said. Clinicians are so focused on the physical, but not on the mental. And right. And so you could, and we've seen this, we could look through history, like you've had physically fit people, but then, mentally they're a hot mess. Right. Mm-hmm. And you can't have one without the other, I feel, right? Like, and especially when you get a cancer diagnosis, and especially something that's really daunting like pancreatic cancer, it is critical to have your mental health as strong as your physical health, probably even stronger, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you want that mental health to be like ironclad strong, but there is such a stigma around the world, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, you talk to someone about your mental health. What's wrong with you? For years, right? For years and years and years, people have been like, and I get it, it is a very personal thing. But we shouldn't have the stigma of mental health. And we've brought on mental health experts. People have talked about it on the podcast. We even had a guy recently who, credits his therapist, his mental health therapist, for really getting him through that very difficult time. And I just saw him 2 weeks ago, and he's still seeing the mental, now he's in a stage where he's just going, he's NED, doesn't have any sign of cancer right now, but he's still seeing his mental therapist, because that's how positive it is for him in his life. Mm-hmm. So it is really interesting how we don't, it's like that stigma. And I don't know how, I don't have the answer to that, but I do know, like you said, the people that thrive are people that get through it. They have that support on that mental side, as well as the physical piece of it as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's, it goes hand in hand, especially if you have to go through heavy treatment, your mindset is so key, because if you go in already, and of course you're scared and everything, but it can support you a lot if you work on your mental health and your mindset.
So let's talk a little bit about that and use your experience. Were there certain exercises, books? I know you said, before, the skills in terms of changing that mindset. And I know you talked about those two questions, but are there books? Are there resources that maybe you can share? Maybe some bit of advice for you, given your background and your experience, like things that helped you during that time to better that skill?
I read a lot of books from psychologists or growth mindset and, psychology books. I watched a lot of YouTube. I recommend everybody to find a role model. I think role models is really cool because everybody can find somebody that he or she is like just a bit in front and doing maybe something you also want to do, and you can learn and just like study this person and see like what they are doing. There is a nice online course, I think from Yale, The Science of Happiness. I think it's public, that I can highly recommend. And of course, you also find on my website, you find a lot of resources. I have my own online course out there. I published a book this year. It's called Dare to Live. I can share with you the link if you want. You can find it on Amazon, where I share small chapters of anecdotes or neuroscience example of mindset. So it's consciously very like written in a style that you can digest it like easily. So that's definitely also a good point to start.
Awesome. We talked before we hit record on this term survivorship.
Yeah.
How do you, in your experience, how do you define survivorship?
It's not an end goal. It's a process. You know, I called my nonprofit My Survival Story. And it's a very conscious selected name. So the my is pointing out it's very personal. Like every story is different. The survival is not an end goal or a status. It's a process. You're surviving all the time until you die. You know, that's like how it goes. It's like, it's a never ending thing until it's the end. You know, it's not like you get approval, 5-year NED, and now you're a survivor. I don't believe that. And the story in the word My Survival Story is chosen because I believe that our life is a story we tell ourselves, that our brain is a storytelling machine, and it matters which story you tell yourself. Like based on where you put focus, you will have a different quality of life. And that's your choice. And that's a choice nobody can take away from you, not a cancer, not a doctor, not any other challenge in your life. Nobody, like, this is your responsibility to choose like where you look. So coming back to survivorship, it's something that it's not finished, you know, it's not like you are a survivor and you're not. So it's more, for me, it's more like, how do you survive? You know, not how long, you know, it's like, what do you make out of your time? Like what matters to you? And I think that is more important than if you'll get like 10 years or 20 years or 50 years. Of course, we all want to live long. I mean, don't get me wrong, but I think it's more about the how.
That is so powerful. And, you know, Martin, I appreciate the openness and everything you just said, because as we said before, like, you know, no one knows, tomorrow's not guaranteed for anyone. Right. And if this is one thing that this disease has taught me, that, you know, we don't control a lot of things. And I think to your point, which is just so powerful, how you survive versus how long is really, you sum it up wonderfully, because again, regardless of whether you have cancer or not, like bad stuff happens. And we don't know, like we don't control that cards. I think everyone, there's this ideology, and maybe we could say, like, so for some people, this mindset that they feel like they're going to live forever. And we know that is not the case. There is no, well, maybe there is a fountain of youth. No one's discovered it or shared it yet. But, you know, I think through Hollywood and through all these other distractions that are in our society, social media, that, you know, there's this idea of prolonging life as long as you can, which is great and wonderful, but that's not reality for anyone. No. And we don't control that.
And I think that's also the beauty about this illness. And I mean, I'm really saying this sitting here, starting in 1 week with another chemo, not knowing if it's going well or not. But if you get hit by a car, it's like, bang, your way, you know? Yeah. And having this confrontation with the finity of your life, of your time, it gives you the chance to make a conscious choice. And maybe the choice is for a week, for a day, maybe for 2 years. I mean, but you can make a conscious choice, and that's beautiful, because you can let go of stuff you don't need, and you can just, focus on what matters to you. And I think that's beautiful.
And you know what the reality of that too is? I don't know the percentage, but I think it's probably pretty high. There's probably a lot of people in the world that never have that.
Yeah.
Which is that's beauty in that. I've got a couple questions left for you here, and then we're going to share with our audience where they can connect, learn more, get you've got a great YouTube video on your TED Talk, and learn more about your book. My first question here, and this is kind of a little, the last three are always loaded and a little bit thought provoking. Hindsight's always 20/20. Have you ever looked back? Sometimes as I write my notes, I see some of these pictures, and you know, we focus a lot here on mindset. You have this Ph.D. in neuroscience, stress and emotions. You ever think about like, hey, if I wasn't in that field when I got diagnosed, would things be different? Like if I was, and I'm not trying to throw shade on anyone, like if I was a mechanic or a downhill skier, that was my profession versus getting a PhD in neuroscience, would my mindset, my experiences be different?
It definitely would be different because I would be a different person, I don't know if I would deal better or worse, or that I cannot say, but what definitely would be different is I will not do what I do today, because the combination of like having the theoretical background as a PhD and having the personal experience as a long-term survivor points me really in this focus of sharing insights and knowledge and experiences from a very unique perspective. Maybe if I would have been a mechanic, maybe, I don't know, I would have worked out more early in my life. I wouldn't have got cancer. I don't know, like it's hard to say.
Yeah. I just, sometimes I see like people, I always say like people go through these experiences in life or do these certain things, and it kind of prepares them for what they kind of, what the challenges they experience in the future. Even though they didn't know that, like getting into neuroscience, you probably had a different, calling for that when you decided to go down that road. But then now seeing, fast forward 10 years later, where that has benefited you and helped you in your personal experience is just really fascinating to me. So nothing to dig deeper. I just think it's kind of fascinating. My next question here, given everything you've gone, and I know we've given out some golden nuggets, as I call them here on this podcast, but maybe there are other things that you would provide if someone listening or watching has just been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. What are some of the things that you would advise them to look into or to go down or to follow, given the experience you've experienced with pancreatic cancer?
I would not dig into the statistics, because you are not a statistic. Your body, like if you are at the beginning of your journey, your body is not in the internet yet, so everything you read there, and I know I have done it myself, it's not good news when you read statistics about pancreatic cancer, is not representing what is happening at this moment in your body. So that would be an advice. Just skip the statistics and rather try to find people and stories of hope and that empower you, that help you to shift the focus, away from the numbers towards like the humans. That would be my advice.
It's powerful. My last question here, always a loaded question. There's no right or wrong to this. Given your experience, how do you define the term pancreatic cancer?
Oh, a very annoying friend that was never invited to the party. Like the friend that comes to a party and doesn't want to leave. So how do I define it?
That's perfect.
Yeah, I think that's like my humoristic way of looking at it. Like if you have these Christmas holidays and you have the annoying relative who always shows up and like, oh no, this guy again.
I love it. And I think everyone listening has one of those. So that is so relatable, Martin. Yeah. I love it. Last thing here for anyone listening or watching, if they want to learn more about what you're doing, the book you wrote, as I mentioned, you've got some great videos. You did a TED Talk, which is awesome, up on your video. Where's the best place, social media or the website? What's the best place for people to connect with you?
Yeah, I think the easiest is just Google my name. It's so unique, Martin Inderbitizin with TC. I think it's easier to read it in the show notes. I'm very active on Instagram and YouTube. And if you want to find out more about the project, then you can just go to mysurvivalstory.org, or the social media handle is @mysurvivalstory. So yeah, we have there a lot of stories, not only pancreatic stories, but a lot of different podcasts, videos, and the rest is just on my website or on my YouTube channel.
Awesome. Martin, it's been a pleasure to have you on our podcast and for me to hear your journey firsthand and to be able to share your journey with the public and our audience.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here. And thanks for all the good things you're doing with Project Purple.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. If you liked today's episode, please share this episode and follow the Project Purple podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. That is a wrap of another episode of the Project Purple podcast. Thanks for listening. And until next time, be safe.